Looks like almost everyone is here. And just to repeat, just to make sure everyone gets it, I will assign this as homework like I did before. We'll go back to that. There's a rumor we might have to go back to everyone checking in. We'll see. If we do, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And if you can't hear any problems, there's issues with Teams again. I'm just checking people online saying the same thing, that sometimes screens are popping in and out. If that happens, please let me know. And so just a couple things. I'm going to start giving zeros for those assignments that aren't turned in or the quizzes that aren't turned in. As I said before, if you ask me, I know this is a lot more difficult at this time to get things done. It's easy to misplace things. I'll give you the opportunity to get the points, but I'm going to change those to zero. So I'm going to do that this afternoon. Just go to the grade, and if you haven't turned in, you got zero. And so get that in there. So I'll give you that opportunity, but you have to let me know. I'm not going to hunt you down. And I do that for all the homework because I think it is so much easier to forget stuff because I just know I do. And so I'll give you that opportunity. But if you don't take it, I'm not going to beg you. Next, if you look online, and let me get that screen up here really quick. So on Teams, I posted this. And it should have, finish up the Abolitionists, the Fire 50s, which I think is an incredibly important moment. And then you have to read America 599 to 615 for Thursday. So just the beginning of the events of the Compromise of 1850. But make sure you read through the DBQ tips and DBQ document samples. So if you click those, it's a PDF of the tips, and it lays out the fact that a document-based question is an essay question. It's a 5-paragraph essay question. We've talked about this, or basic essay question. An opening, 2 to 3 paragraphs, and a closing. And in those body paragraphs, which I liken to short IDs, in those body paragraphs, you must use, let me make sure this is working. Okay, you must use the documents. In a regular DBQ, it's 6 documents, and you must show or use those as examples as evidence to prove your thesis statement. So instead of evidence, just simply evidence, you have to incorporate the purpose of the document, the purpose of it, which is why we did slavery as a defense, or a defense of slavery and the positive good theory of slavery. That you must show from the document. Paraphrase, don't quote, paraphrase from the document elements how this proves or be used as evidence. And don't forget, you need some kind of backstory, historical content too. So please read through that. And then the document sample shows ways that the documents can be used, and it gives some examples from events leading up to the Revolutionary War, and it gives kind of a generic question. And so please look at that. So when we talk about DBQs in class, which I'm going to give you the documents on Friday. I'm going to post it. I'm going to make a DBQ or give you a handout in class. A students, I'll give it to you in class on Monday. Okay, so with that, please read it. So if you have any questions, you can ask Friday. If you don't read it, I don't want to have a lot of sympathy for you if you don't have questions. Okay, so let's get to the last little bit of give me a sec. So let me know if you can't see this. We'll talk about slaves running away, talked about slave resistance. I really hammered this concept of control and cuffies and how racial slurs can be used to control people and how racism is insidious. And so talked about the Underground Railroad as a path north. And I think 4th period, I didn't quite get to two of the most famous conductors on it. So let me just repeat this really quick. Harriet Tubman, who would be best known, probably the best known of the conductors. Sojourner Truth, former slave, went north, involved in a really crazy cult called the Cult of Matthias. And strange things happen to people. They become a tireless fighter for equality, freedom, and equal rights for women. And they were involved in safe houses, running people home. Harriet Tubman would make 13 trips. She would be a Union spy. She would actually lead a mission into South Carolina to attack Confederate strongholds. And so a pretty amazing person with a huge price on her head. And so let me get to slave rebellions. I think I just started this in first period. I got through it, but third and fourth, I didn't quite get there. There were very few slave rebellions in the United States because of the high percentage of slaves. That's why I made a big deal about those pie charts. And oops, let me do something really quick. Give me one sec. You make the best laid plans of mice and men. Sorry, just. Okay, good. So there was a huge slave rebellion in New Orleans in 1811, but a lot of people in the United States saw that as an aberration because Louisiana just came into the country. A lot of slaves who rebelled really thought all the talk they heard about the United States standing up for things like freedom would actually apply to them, which they were sorely disappointed. And over 200 people would be captured and executed by the militia, so by the state, the government. And this is the memorial outside because the heads were put on a pike as used to terrify people, terrify slaves for not revolting again. Remember, it was household hands who told on them. And this memorial of the heads on a pike is one of the most amazing memorials I've ever seen. And if you ever get a chance, I would look at it. But then Denmark Vesey, this is right where I put in first period too. Denmark Vesey was a freed slave called a freedman, and he was a minister. And remember, religion was one of the ways that slaves could gather because this was the whole civilizing thing. Uh-oh, did we lose the screen?
No, it's fine.
Oh, good, okay. There we go. And to South Carolina, freedmen were a real threat because they're the ones who, okay, there are all kinds of restrictions on people who are not white in South Carolina, but still with more freedom, they could lead a potential rebellion. And so household slaves of the governor of South Carolina told authorities, so told the governor, basically told the through the governor that Denmark Vesey was going to lead a massive rebellion. Now, to this day, we don't know if he was actually going to do this. He very well could have been framed. Probably what happened is he was toying with some kind of way to fight back, and this turned into a massive threat of a rebellion. But Denmark Vesey would absolutely panic the South. It's no coincidence that this would radicalize people like John C. Calhoun. And then jumping to the biggie, the most important of all the slave rebellions in American history, not because it was the biggest, but because of the timing. Nat Turner was a slave, and like a lot of slaves, could read, write. He was a clerk, did math. A slave in Virginia. I forgot to put that down, so make sure you put down Virginia. His reading, almost certainly he'd seen newspapers and a few things. You know, they try to keep people you're trying to control, you try to keep them ignorant. So they don't realize that not only are they not alone, but what's going on outside of them. Try to keep them isolated and insecure. But he probably read some newspapers, maybe he saw some abolitionist material, but almost certainly it was from his reading of the Bible that he realized slavery was immoral, this was never going to change, and the only way was to fight back. And so he began to talk to slaves, sometimes in religious settings, so religious meetings. Sometimes, as this picture shows, they would meet at night out in the swamps, out in the outside in the marshland outside of his plantation, and they organized a rebellion. And they rose up, and this picture, in very stark terms, shows his family, his master, the slave herder, John Travis is his name right here. They rose up in the middle of the night, came in with farm implements or whatever they could find, and hacked apart the family. And then their plan was to go from plantation to plantation, or free the slaves, organize a rebellion. They knew they're going to have to kill every master or anybody they find like that, or the slave rebellion will fall apart because they're not strong enough, and go to the mountains and hide. That was the plan. It's not a really well thought out plan, but you can imagine the rage they had. They murdered people, eventually 50 inhabitants. It says 55, but 50 whites would be killed by this rebellion, but household help ran to authorities from the Travis residence, told on them, and just making sure it's all working. And militia came, and that's at the bottom right here. Militia came and easily subdued the poorly armed slaves, and many were killed, over 100 were killed. They would have a very high-profile trial of Nat Turner, which was so amazing. They had this trial for murder of a man who's not considered to be, well, not only is he not a citizen, he's not a person. He's property. And it'd be like having a trial for an animal that charged somebody and killed somebody, or a horse that bucked and killed somebody. Of course, they did have a trial for an elephant in the 1890s when a Barnum and Bailey circus elephants because he trampled somebody. Yes, I had a trial and condemned the elephant to death. I'll tell you that story later on. It's topsy. But anyways, back to this. So they would have this high-profile trial and be executed for inciting a rebellion. They want to make an example of him. But I can't begin to tell you how this terrified the South. Remember, the greatest fear was slave rebellion. Virginia was the most populous of the slave states, and here's a rebellion. And they immediately, remember I told you they thought all Northerners were abolitionists? They believed abolitionists caused this. And this is going to lead to a series of laws that put a star by it. The most strenuous of the slave codes, called the Nat Turner codes. And first off, they had to wear a slave tag. In the 20th century through today, they would call this an internal passport. Basically, like, you always got to show your ID. So here's an example of, it looked like in World War II, they started calling them dog tags. You probably heard that term. So they would have to buy these, so slave tags. Free blacks had to wear that too in the South to prove that they are free. You have servant, field hand, and here's biscuit, and you can read a buck means a male, horrifically racist terms. They also banned education for most slaves. They banned their right to assemble, or no right to assemble. They said slaves could not together, like for example, Virginia, there could be no possible way that more than 4 slaves can meet together, period, unless it's a religious meeting. They strengthened the militia. They begin to censor the mail to keep out abolitionist material. And this is where we get the gag rule, which I mentioned before. No mention of slavery in Congress. Remember, I mentioned this before, but they talked about how republics are incompatible with slavery. To maintain slavery, states, countries, and the states like Virginia have got to restrict freedoms for everybody. They have to censor and even arrest people, white people, if they speak out against slavery, because that might incite slave rebellion. Slavery is tyranny for everybody. And that's why in areas that don't have slave codes, they can't have slavery. But these would be huge. And this would definitely radicalized the South. In the North, most people were not necessarily opposed to slavery. They didn't want the territories, and that's the way it would be all the way through the Civil War. But they were still like, wow, you put it down, not a big deal. To the South, they were furious that the North wasn't more upset. And this is going to lead to all kinds of conspiracy theories, etc. The Nat Turner laws, put a star by that. Oh, wait, attention. Uh-oh. Something bait's come up. Okay, I like this sign. You know what you guys need? I know what you're thinking. Gosh, it's been a long time since we've done a thesis statement. So, just for practice, what I want you to do is write a thesis. What methods did slaveholders use to justify slavery? I want you to make a 5-paragraph essay. So I want you to have X, remember that's the main point of the question, your position, something that ties it all together, and then A, B, and C, your topics. So take a couple minutes, and I know some of you are watching this, we're watching this later. I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes. Quick write a thesis. Now remember, all those things about, we had before in the last couple days about ways to justify slavery. You got a minute? Go. I'll give you an example. We're just doing a practice. As I walk around. And yes, college. Huh. Remember, racism. Positive theory, civilizing. Got lots of ways to do it. So when you answer this question, you have to address slaveholders and justifying slavery. You have to show that. And then you need something to tie it together. So you can justify because they think the system works, they want to maintain it, because they want to do something about the conflict, or they want to continue to make money even though they knew it was immoral. You might just want to say it's racism, but something to tie it together. And so I'm going to look at your thesis statement, make sure that you address the main point, make sure that you address or have some kind of position, that's the why, and then an A, B, and C. So that would be the topics for your 3 paragraphs. And if you wrote this up and think, gosh, I think this is a good thesis, but I'm not sure, send it to me on chat and I'll give you a quick, that's good, or maybe something stronger here. So let me give you my quick one that I wrote literally in the seconds before, because I decided to do this today. If you can't read it, or it's small, slaveholders justified slavery through the ideology of racism as seen in the positive good theory of slavery, claiming they were civilized in the slaves, and because it appeared to have economic benefits. So the positive good theory of slavery, I also thought about changing this to, and the more I look at it, maybe this would have been better for me, is saying, I wrote it very quickly. And that's one of the things about when you go through and think, oh, wait a second, that might be better this way. Maybe mentioned by the positive good theory of slavery by claiming they're civilizing the slaves and had economic benefits and it's natural. But ideology of racism, the whole thing's going to come back to racism, positive good theory of slavery. And that one I would talk about treating labor better, that wage slaves, that kind of thing, civilizing the slaves, and the economic benefits, talk about how it works and when to keep it going. There are other examples. I just did it really quick, but that's an example. If you have your own thesis statement and want to let me know, please do, and I will go back and look at it. One more thing. I did think this was funny. I want to know more about that man. Okay, so if you have, send it to me. I'm not going to answer it right now, but I will take a look at it. So at the same time as Nat Turner's rebellion, in fact, I want to look at it, but same time as Nat Turner's rebellion, and please let me know if you can't see this. I'm scared to hit buttons now.
No, it's good.
Abolitionists started the same time. And abolitionists, before you write Garrison and Frederick Douglass, the position of abolitionists were this. So let's do this first on the left. I don't know why I organized it this way. I just did. Slavery was immoral. By definition, slavery was immoral. They're not free soilers. Abolitionists believe slavery must be gone. It's immoral. We have to get rid of it. Remember, free soilers said no slavery in the territories. But there's a bitter disagreement amongst abolitionists. Just because we want to get rid of slavery, do we believe people are equal? And a significant number did not believe former slaves were equal. Most of them were thinking that we want to get rid of slaves and then have a white republic. A white republic. And this is a complex, or it's kind of more complex than this, but it is truly based upon this idea of white supremacy. The idea that if we do have different races, it will be so divisive that it'll break apart the republic. And so get rid of slaves. Slavery is immoral. We don't want slaves, and then get rid of them. But in 1831, William Lloyd Garrison, who's in the right-hand corner, so that's him right there, he started publishing his newspaper, The Liberator. And Garrison was different than the vast majority of abolitionists, not only because he was different as that he believed that all people were equal. He sincerely believed that slaves should be freed and then become equal members of society. So he was different in that way. And he was such an eloquent writer and such a force that he had great influence. And so even though, I'll get to this in a sec, but the Liberator started in 1831, the same year as Nat Turner. I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure you get that down, 1831. So to the Southern point of view, here come these Northern agitators who are trying to rile up revolution, and then Nat Turner happens. That's why we have to stifle this. That's why they're the moral enemy. In fact, in 1831, an abolitionist who was starting a newspaper based on Garrison, a guy named Elijah Lovejoy, was lynched by a pro-slavery mob in Illinois. We demand to keep slaves so much we'll kill you. And then the most famous of the abolitionists and one of the greatest Americans was a man by the name of Frederick Douglass. And there's a picture of Douglass on the right. And Douglass, slavery. As a young man, he fled north, and then he wrote his autobiography, used the money from his autobiography to buy his freedom. And I love that. I love how that shows the hypocrisy of the whole system of slavery. We're civilizing them, and it's what's best for them. But if you give us money, we'll set you free. Throws the whole thing out. But still, he would start a group called, or newspaper called the North Star. And soon it would be the most influential abolitionist newspaper, especially amongst former slaves. And North Star, hey, if you're running away in the South, the North Star guides you to freedom, which is a great illusion. Great illusion. I love that. The North Star. And he wanted not just freedom. He wanted equality. And that's why I bolded. Equality means the rights guaranteed to all citizens under the Constitution. So when the Civil War would be fought, he demanded black soldiers not just be enlisted, but they fight to prove they deserve equality. And this is going to be very divisive. And he would also be at the Seneca Falls conference and for equality for women. He was quite the radical and would spend his entire life. Okay, I want to jump. I want to go back for a second. I just said he's quite the radical. Radical means he wants equal rights. That was radical. In fact, that's still kind of radical today. It is amazing that women are not guaranteed equal rights under the Constitution in the United States today. And to demand that is considered radical. I want you to ponder that for a second. When over half the population, to demand equality for half the population is seen as radical today. So I said radical, and I stopped to go, wow, wait a sec. But he understood something else, that racism was class-based, and talked about this a lot. Yes, racism is pernicious and based on the color of skin, but it's class, it's wealth. That is the root cause. And that whites, poor whites, will fight to keep slavery, or after the Civil War, to keep blacks as second-class citizens, because that is the only status they have, is that they're above. They're a step above somebody else. And this is class and status. And until you get rid of those class issues, meaning wealth kind of focused to all the big plantation owners, you're going to have racism. But pretty radical man. A couple more we have to get. Oh, this the Biden abolitionists. I got to jump the gun. So we jump right here. So, sorry, I just looked at the clock. So with that, a lot of abolitionists wanted to get rid of slavery and send the former slaves to Africa or some other colony. They would say back to Africa, even though the vast majority were born in the United States. One of the most successful organizations was called the American Colonization Society. And it organized money to either send former slaves or buy slaves, but mostly just send them to Africa. And they even, it's so weird how you put this, because they didn't quite purchase it from anybody, but got the claim for a little piece of land in Africa where former slaves seen here were sent to Africa, which must have been just an incredible shock, considering they were born in the Americas and then sent to Africa. But this implication is the country, because of racism and the idea of white supremacy, they'll never actually be free there, which of course they kind of were white supremacists too. And they would set up the country of, eventually called, and I didn't type this in here, but I should have. You can see it on the map here, Liberia. Liberia for liberty. And since it was started in the early 1820s, the capital of Liberia to this day, you can see it on the map right here, Monrovia, after James Monroe. And this was a very popular idea, to free slaves and then ship them to Africa. A lot of free soilers believed in this. Martin Van Buren toyed with it. In fact, the most famous free soiler of them all thought this was a good idea well into 1862. And that was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was no abolitionist. He was a free soiler. And so this shows you the divide, the racism. And let me add one more thing about abolitionists. They terrify the South, but put this little asterisk and put this someplace. I didn't type this in. Abolitionists never made up more than 5 to 8% of the northern population, And that's by 1860. At best, maybe 5 or 6% in the 1850s, maybe up to 7 or 8% by the Civil War. Most people in the North were probably free soilers, but they didn't particularly want to get rid of slavery or didn't feel strongly enough. They were like men like Martin Van Buren, who thought slavery is immoral, it's wrong, but that's the way it goes. I don't like it, but let's not have it in California. And so that's the abolitionist movement. I should add 5 to 8% to the South. Everybody's an abolitionist. So we're coming to the fiery 50s. Notice I put that in red. Ooh, the red, it's coming at you. The fiery 50s. So the 1850s and the events that led to war. And don't forget one thing about this. You're going to have two sections, the North and the South. The North and the South. And they both see reality different. And more of the South, they're going to have this, they're going to see a world filled with conspiracies, and they're going to distrust every single thing the South does. And that right there is John Brown, who we'll get to. So just to review, remember the Mexican session. So the Mexican session right here, Zachary Taylor is president. The thought was they had lots of time. Remember Wilmot Proviso, they all thought about having free soil in the Mexican session. Well, California in 1849, end of 1849, had more than enough people, especially if you take the massive size of California, to become a state. Even though the vast majority lived just here, the oil regions and Sacramento, or San Francisco. And California wanted to come in as a free state. They didn't have slave codes because Mexico had banned slavery. Most people came for the gold rush, they didn't have slaves. People aren't going to bring slaves unless there's slave codes. That's why Texas had slavery. And this literally like an explosion. And Zachary Taylor now, who really never made his position, he had to now decide. So there's Taylor. I just like that picture for that strange thing under his nose. It's President Zachary Taylor. And Taylor, going in 1850, looked at this, and actually, a shocking thing for a plantation owner from Louisiana. Zachary Taylor was sympathetic to free soilers. In fact, he befriended a very prominent abolitionist senator, and we'll get to him, from Massachusetts by the name of William Sumner. And he came up with a position that absolutely shocked Southerners and Northerners too. Taylor looked at it and realized, I need to solve the problem. I need to solve this problem now. And the problem is, remember I mentioned this before, the trigger of civil war, and everyone knew it back in 1850, was slavery in the territories. That's why Texas was such a big deal. So that's the problem. Slavery in the territories. Slavery in the territories. What do we do about that? Why I put an equal sign there, I don't know. But Californians come into free state. Taylor looked at it and he pondered maps and thought about it. So all this area here, this massive area here, there's enough people there to make a state too. By the way, I should add the Mormon population that fled Nauvoo, Illinois, right here after during the 1840s, after Smith, sorry, something. So I'm sitting here, I'm looking out my window, and some guy's walking his dog, and he stopped and stared at me through the window. And I was a little bit silly. Why are you looking at me? And he just kind of looked at me because I got my screen set up in the window, and then walked past. So I guess I'm being stalked. But like, well, why don't stare at me? All right. After Smith was murdered in Nauvoo, Illinois, and Mormons came here, they got away. They went to Mexico. They wanted to escape the United States. They actually were planning. Brigham Young here was thinking, when he heard about the Mexican War, he thought we might have to leave. He sent people to this little tiny village called Los Angeles in case they needed a safety valve to escape and run away to Samoa, they were thinking, or the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii. As it turned out, they didn't have to flee, but the Mormons that sent there, fresh from their experience in dry Utah, would start irrigating the area around LA and planting citrus trees. And ironically, it's just such a weird thing, turn of events. The people that Brigham Young sent here as a safety valve for Mormons if they had to flee would help found Los Angeles. Just one of those weird quirks. Okay, back to this. So Taylor is sitting there looking at this. The South is going nuts wanting to become a free state, and they assumed, okay, Taylor is going to come up with something. Do we extend 3630? Do we open it up to all the slavery? Something. And what Taylor decided was this. We'll just skip the territory part and make 2 states. Just skip it. 2 states. And here's a picture of Taylor he thought this was splitting the difference in this very awkward picture of the North and the South. We're splitting the difference. We'll create 2 big states, California and this massive state in orange, which also angered Texas. Massive state in orange called New Mexico. 2 states, skipping the problem of slavery in the territories, and they could come in with their existing constitutions, their existing rules and laws they had in Mexico. Well, remember, Mexico didn't have slavery, and therefore they would come in as free states. Everyone got that? I didn't type that in, but that's why I have that in there, that they would come in as free states. And Taylor thought, no one will complain. We skip in the territory parts. They'll come in. Well, not so necessarily as free states. They'll come in with their existing constitution, and so that means free states. He sincerely believed that this would solve the problem. He had one of those eureka moments. Problem solved, nothing to worry about. By the way, what a massive state this would be. So California, New Mexico, massive states into the Union, problem solved, Civil War averted. He sincerely believed that. This also shows you how naive he was, and maybe Sumner and others were pushing him to, let's have this out right now. Let's have it out. Well, Southern members of Congress literally took this as a declaration of war. And the most radical members of Southerners were called the fire eaters. And they're fire eaters as they're a younger generation of congressmen, so members of the House and the Senate, who were not looking to compromise or find some way to solve the problem. They wanted to protect slavery or secession. Fire eaters meant they threatened war. And so Edmund Ruffin, who would be from Virginia, member of Congress, there he is in his militia uniform. The legend is he would fire the first shot that would lead or the attack on Fort Sumter. William Yancey of Alabama, a senator there. James Mason of Illinois, and by the way, Virginia. Mason and Yancey would both be in the both be prominent Confederates, and Mason in the cabinet for the Confederacy. And Washington, D.C. was a very small town. Members of Congress were only there for a short time, and then they go back home. So they all stayed in boarding houses together. So imagine this boarding house of all these men who all thinking alike, all the Southerners living together, convinced that Northerners were not just against slavery, but trying to have slaves cut their throat in the middle of the night. And they just got themselves all fired up. Remember I mentioned that term, confirmation bias? This is confirmation bias. I knew it. They're out to get us. They want us to die. And so these fire eaters immediately threaten secession unless you open up California. We're going to leave the Union. By the way, this is the definition of bullying. And so into the breach one more time, one last time, Henry Clay. Henry Clay tried to be president 3 times, Mr. Whig, known as the Great Compromiser. There's Clay right there. He's going to make this bill that not only will solve the California issue, but would solve all the problems. An omnibus bill is a bill that has many different parts. And Taylor dubbed it the omnibus bill. Taylor's going to be opposed to this. As Taylor sees it, my plan's the best. Everyone else shut up. Right there, that picture of Henry Clay. I really like this one because it shows all the imperfections in the glass negative, but he always has that little smile on, doesn't it? That must have been his natural resting face, kind of a little, like he knows something. And this all-encompassing bill would solve all the problems. Taylor's like, I have the best solution. Everyone else shut up. And so, in fact, Taylor is thinking, I might have to be like Andrew Jackson. I might have to fight against Southern bullying. And he's a Southerner. Chris Jackson was that too. But Henry Clay has this all-encompassing bill. Now, Clay's already feeling kind of sick. He's feeling bad because he knows it's getting near the end. And this might be his last chance. So he proposes this bill. Now, you're going to write down these things.
We are currently running into another class that started at 9:36.
Okay, if you got to go to another class, I'm not done, so you have to come back and then finish this up. So I will record this.
Okay.
These are the main points about this. The main points of the Compromise of 1850. The main points. And just paraphrase this down, but this is the compromise, and it's going to solve all the problems. One big bill, an omnibus bill. So first off, California Free State. So no slave codes, California comes in. And by the way, a lot of people were like, what about 3630? Well, that only affected the Louisiana Purchase. Next, slavery abolished in DC, but put asterisks there, leave that one blank. Leave that one blank, because that will change. A lot of even free soilers who weren't necessarily opposed to slavery hated the fact that there was a slavery right in the capital. So that was part of it. Next, New Mexico and Utah territories. So divide this big area into two massive territories, and they would have popular sovereignty. So they would be able to vote down the road whether or not they'll be open to slavery. They'll vote down the road. But remember what I told you about popular sovereignty. This was kind of a scam. This was kind of a scam, but do put this one down. Next, the Constitution says runaway slaves, called fugitive slaves, must be returned. Well, this is going to make a stronger fugitive slave laws that citizens in every state, including free states, must assist in finding runaway slaves. Remember I told you that term posse? They must join a posse. A tougher fugitive slave law. So this, Clay thought, would appease Southern fears about all slaves running away to places like Massachusetts. So they'll return runaway slaves. Next, the Texas border would be resolved. And Texas, the debt that the Republic of Texas owed, that would be forgiven. The U.S. government would pay that. And so Texas would have these problems taken care of. Now, Clay suggested the border being right here. And this, all the rest of this would go to New Mexico. That infuriated Southerners. But what Clay thought was, see, well, all these things are all these 5 issues are going to solve some of the biggest problems and resolve the threat of civil war. And he would come up with this great compromise, one bill, everybody will have to give something up. People will come together. Well, he should have known this was folly. The fire eaters aren't going to vote for any of this. They want California open to slavery. It's popular sovereignty is not enough. And the Texas border, they want the whole thing as slave states. Fire eaters won't vote for this. And the small percentage of free soilers despise popular sovereignty and the fugitive slave law. And so it's going to go to a massive debate on the floor of the United States Congress. Now, here's a very stylized picture of Clay presenting this to the population, or to the Senate. But almost immediately there's a fight. And this picture shows one of it. Guns were drawn on the floor of the United States Senate. People would open their overcoat and flash guns to shut up debate. There were fights in the gallery of spectators right up here in the Senate. This is actually true. There were fist fights in the gallery. No, the country became more divided than ever before. Southerners were absolutely convinced that Clay had become their tool to overthrow and destroy them. And like I said, murder them in the middle of the night. And the point you have to get is this. I didn't type this down. Please write this down. It didn't pass. Didn't pass. The compromise did not pass. And Clay refused to break up the bill like he did back for the Missouri Compromise. And in fact, Clay went home that hot June in 1850 when they adjourned Congress because of just the sweltering heat in Washington, D.C. assuming he had failed. The Union might dissolve. He assumed it was over. He went home with the assumption, it's done. It's all over. We're going to have civil war. There's no way the country can survive this with the South threatening secession. And in fact, he would be right that he didn't have much time. This might be it. Because, does anybody know what that is? That is a death mask. That is the death mask of Henry Clay. Right there. And you see he has the same grin? He knew something. Okay, death mask. It was very common, especially before photography, that you wanted to have a mask of somebody, a loved one who passed away. And they would make a cast of their face after they died. There was also live masks too, where they would do this. And then carve the eyes and the hair to try to make them look so you have something to remember them by. Now, to our point of view, that is shockingly creepy. But before photography, and photography was brand new, so they're still doing it, they kept a death mask. So that's Henry Clay's death mask. He would die soon after this debate. He knew this might be it. He was very scared. We don't know exactly what it was, but probably cholera. Daniel Webster, the Whig from Massachusetts, who spoke out in the Foote-Webster debate against nullification of the tariff because he knew nullification of the tariff would break up the Union. He came out in support of Henry Clay's Compromise of 1850 with a speech saying, and I put it in quotes there, we must all unify together as a country and pass this bill. Northerners and Southerners must give up something. He comes there in support of this bill, not as a Massachusetts man, not as a Northern man, but as an American. We must all give up something to save this country. But it didn't pass. And he too thought this might be the last stand, the last straw. See that face right there? There's Daniel Webster. And doesn't it look like an angry owl right there? I see an owl. He too knew because he would die the next year. That is Daniel Webster's death mask. And the reason I'm showing you this is not only because the death masks just fascinate me, but also all these old senators who came into office about the same time, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and now the whole country has changed. They're desperately trying to hold it together, and especially Southern fire eaters are saying, the hell with it. We'll blow the whole thing up if we have to. We'll leave ruin. We'll make sure this country dies if we don't get our way. They're bullies. Okay, so that's where I'm going to quit. With Daniel Webster and this Compromise of 1850 controversy, please look at how to write DBQ, how to write, and the examples I gave you. I might put the documents up tomorrow. Heck, I might give it to you today. I might post it today, so check. But that's where I'm going to quit. I will assign this. I want everyone to have a great Wednesday. It's supposed to be sunny. It's going to be in the 90s. Get out, get some sun. Okay, I'm just talking. I'm sure in the 90s somewhere. But I will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.